Hi. Welcome,
Welcome.
Eric. I think you're muted. Let me unmute you. Here you go.
I've got you. There you go.
Awesome. Hey, Eric. Thank you so
Hello.
much for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? We gave a brief introduction. We talked about how you're the lead instructor at GrooveU, and that you are, from a lot of our peers, you are very good at what you do with audio engineering. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, the main thing is I'm the lead audio instructor at GrooveU. We're a 2-year music business school in Columbus.
Wow.
Um, but probably the more relevant thing to talk about is the short version is when I left college, I knew I wanted to be in um, audio, and when I looked around, I realized that the market for rock and roll recording engineers is very saturated.
Wow.
But from my time in, I got a bachelor's of music ed,
Cool.
so I had made all
Oh,
these
wow.
contacts with Westerville Symphony, Upper Arlington Symphony, New Albany Symphony. So I'd made all these classical contacts, and I realized that um, no one was really catering to them. And I know that a lot of my early clients, the comment I kept getting was, yeah, we had this guy come in and he brought all these rock and roll mics and he
Mhm.
stuck them in our face, and it was too loud and it was brash and it was aggressive, and it's a totally different thing in
Hmm.
pop music and rock and roll. Amplification and microphones and things color the sound to get you somewhere, but in classical music, that's not at all what you want to do. You're supposed to just translate what's there and get out of the way. So
I see.
um, so I started doing that in 2000, and it's been paying the bills ever since. So
Awesome, awesome.
Wow.
Well, cool. Well, I guess to get started with the discussion, so musicians these days, I'm sure are creating projects online on platforms like Instagram and Facebook, just because we can't perform. Um, would you suggest any immediate upgrade to that their setup that would just make their project better, just like that?
uh, in my opinion, now granted, of course, I'm biased being an audio guy,
Yep.
but I think a microphone is the best thing that you can do.
Hmm.
Um, there was a study that I mention a lot
Hmm.
in this kind of discussion. Um, I can't recall exactly where I saw this, but at one point they did a scientific study where they put two videos side by side, and they brought uh, the um, uh, the participants
Hmm.
in, and they said, which video looks better to you?
Hmm.
In reality, both pictures were identical.
Oh, wow.
The video file
Whoa.
was completely identical, but the audio was an MP3 on one, and it was a full resolution on the other. And the overwhelming answer was that everybody said that the video with good sound looked better.
Wow. Wow.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
they told the participants, tell us what looks better. They said nothing about the sound, but the only variable was the sound.
Interesting.
So
Wow.
Wow.
we,
That's
Yeah.
we go through life. We have more than one sense. We have two ears. We have two ears, two eyes. Of course, touch and smell hasn't come into it yet, but it's a whole experience, right? You
Yeah.
got to address all the senses, and sound is a very important one.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. We have a question already in the chat from Ari Evan 93. He says, "I have a Rode NT USB microphone. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if that matters, but what software would you recommend for audio editing on a MacBook? I'm not that well versed in editing software." And he says, continues, "The mic has improved my audio quality, but I still feel I could do more when editing, mastering an audio file before I post it."
The dirty little secret, well, it's not a dirty secret, but one of the things that you see a lot of arguments about online is Pro Tools sounds better than Logic, and Logic sounds better than Ableton, and
Mhm.
Ableton sounds better than you get that all the time.
Yep.
The
Mhm.
reality is they all sound the same. Once once the audio has been recorded, it's turned into ones and zeros, and
Mhm.
at that point they're all the same.
Mm.
Um, the biases you get, it's scientifically been proven that they've dropped files into all these different software and they've processed them and sent them back out, and then you do what's called a null test. You put them side by side and you invert one, you flip all the waveforms, and they completely cancel out, which means there is zero difference. So but where I think that question always comes from is it's really tempting to think that the software is going to be the thing that's going to help. It's really a matter of experience. And I actually suggest for a lot of people, if you've got a Mac, just use GarageBand. The audio quality is not determined by the software. GarageBand, and I believe GarageBand, I haven't used GarageBand in a little while, to be honest, but I believe it can accept third-party plugins. So if you do start buying Waves or McDSP or Isotope or any of that stuff, it should still run in GarageBand. But the big advantage to GarageBand is that it's simple. In my 20 years, I've helped set up a lot of studios and get a lot of people started. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I have set up somebody with a very complex setup, with very complex software and hardware, and their productivity goes to nothing.
Oh, wow.
Because the learning curve is so steep that if they have any interest in going to the basement to work on music, they're opening a manual and now they're a computer engineer, right? And they don't, I've literally seen people almost stop writing music because they bought all this gear they thought they need. We all specialize, right? When I do something with Siwoo does not expect me to pick up a violin and be any good, right? But at the same time, it goes the other way too. I'm also not going to be like, hey, Siwoo, I set everything up. Pro Tools is open. Knock yourself out.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's not the point.
Yeah.
Right.
If I was, even if I was equally good at both, I wouldn't be employable at either. Right? Specialists, being a specialist matters. Don't try to be. There's still this thing about it would be so cool to be the person in the studio. It's a lot of work. It's many hours of learning that stuff, and those are hours that you didn't spend on your instrument, or you didn't spend on your songwriting, or you didn't spend on something else. So
good point.
Stay with simple. Sheryl Crow uses GarageBand to write her music.
Whoa!
She has a full studio in her basement, but she uses GarageBand because all the technology gets out of the way.
Wow. Wow.
So I would say GarageBand, honestly.
Wow. Awesome.
What if we don't have a MacBook, we're a PC user? Brian Holmballen asked, so is Audacity recommended as well in this case?
Yes, if you got something simple that works, knock yourself out. I am a Mac guy. A lot of people have been asking me the PC question recently, and to be honest, I don't know enough on the PC side to make a suggestion. The one thing that I will make a suggestion for, and you kind of want to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. If you think that you are going to really do a lot of recording, or you're going to be collaborating with professional engineers, Avid Pro Tools has a free version called Pro Tools First.
Okay.
Yes.
And if you think at some point you would get into the full program, then go for that. It's free. It's an industry standard, and that's it. If you don't, having said that, Pro Tools has a huge learning curve. It's an industry standard because of its flexibility.
Right.
I'm an Avid certified instructor, and even I tell people to get into Pro Tools unless they're really serious.
Wow.
But PreSonus Studio One also has a free version called Prime. That program I really like, and that's also multi-platform.
Cool. Can one of our mods actually get some of those links for people in the chat, just to the website, and they can check out the free versions?
If I would have thought about it, I'm sorry, I would have grabbed you the link.
Oh,
the
no
PreSonus
worries.
one is a little bit hard to find, but you're looking for their website. I think is a little. It's not super easy to navigate, in my opinion.
Okay.
But you're looking for Studio One Prime.
Studio One Prime. Okay. So Studio One
Prime,
Prime,
and then there's 3 paid versions, and you don't really need the paid versions.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. So Ken, I know you. We actually, we both. When I started streaming, I was asking questions about you about mics, and I remember we have the same like audio interface. I don't know much, like, and like Eric, like like you're totally right. This is not my forte, so I'm only doing this now just because like there's no one else to help me with it. So I'm doing it myself. So Ken, like we were talking about mic stuff. I remember, right?
Yeah, no, and that's true. And I feel like as people start diving into the market for microphones, it's kind of overwhelming. There's so many selections. People need to learn kind of, I guess, entire depth of what's out there. And I think it's very much overwhelming for a lot of people. So I don't know if you have any good entry level mics that people can rely on, and if you would recommend things like a USB mic versus getting like an XLR mic and just buying an interface, because I think initially people might find that the USB mics would be just like easy to just plug into a computer, but maybe like the pros and cons of that versus other microphone choices.
Yeah.
Again, it's always a personal thing. As soon as you start, my one concern about USB microphones is that at some point, are they going to become paperweights? Because if when we get to Mac OS 22, is it going to be like, oh, we don't know, you can't connect that anymore, it's a paperweight?
Interesting. Yeah.
Meanwhile, if you buy a normal microphone with a normal microphone connection, that microphone connection has been around since the late 60s. So it's not going anywhere fast. So it's, in my opinion, I would suggest that you buy a normal microphone, and you can get really, really affordable interfaces for less than $100.
Yep.
Very, very easily. I feel like for the most part, Ken's totally right. If you talk with retailers, they refer to microphones as flavor of the month because there's always a new one. Right? It's just there's always a new one.
I see.
If you're looking in around like the $200 range, in my opinion, they're pretty much all the same.
They're all the same. Okay.
If you're looking to actually invest, the things that I suggest, so if there's two things here. If you're a soloist that just wants to record a single instrument, then I would suggest a large diaphragm microphone, just a single one. There's a number of technical reasons why I would choose that over a smaller one. But my opinion, the two that I like to suggest is, and I think it's what Ken has right next to him, the C214.
This one's a 414.
Oh, it's a 414. Okay, great.
Yeah,
that's even better. But the reason I suggest the 214 is he's got the 414, and the 414 has a bunch of options on it that are great for a studio engineer.
Okay.
But most people don't need that.
I see.
The 214 has no options, but it pretty much has the sound of the 414. And the reason I suggest that is that you can take that for your podcasts. But if you go do a recording session in a studio, I would take that microphone. And as an engineer, if somebody walked in with that, two things would be like, oh, great, I have another microphone that's good enough for me to use in the studio. The other thing is that the 414 has been an industry standard since it was introduced in, I want to say, the early 70s, if I recall correctly. So almost every studio engineer will know what that sounds like.
So they don't have to debug it or anything.
You as a performer will know what your instrument sounds like through it. And you can go to a studio and say, I have a 214. I like the sound of the 414. Do you have a 414? Right? So there's a scalability. I don't know anybody that one of two. I like to tell my students, there is no such thing as living on a plateau. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. Right? And that works for practicing, and it works for your career too. You're either going up or you're going down.
Yep.
hopefully you're going up, right? So if you're starting by doing this thing, you're going to get to a point where maybe you're on the road, maybe you're doing that. Investing in a decent microphone is never a bad thing. If you bought a 214 today and you were still in this business in 10 years, you can still keep that microphone.
Great. Yeah.
Wow.
What's the brand of these 214 and 414s?
That would be the AKG.
AKG. Okay. Great.
AKG. I think the 214 is around 350 now.
Viola
so
Troll
it's a little bit above
Armand
the,
just put
the
a link
budget
into
thing,
it.
but I'm sorry?
Armand just actually just linked it. Yeah, so it is.
Oh, gotcha.
Awesome. Yeah.
Now the actual 414 is over $1,000, so it's a pretty significant jump to go into the 414. I've had a pair of 414s since 2002.
Wow.
And you still use the same one, I'm assuming.
Technically no, but that's a long story. I've been using 414s for 20 years, and I use them regularly.
Wow. Okay. Speaking of the once you get the mic, how important is the mic placement? Is there any basic rules that we can kind of use to apply once we get a microphone?
Absolutely. So this also goes with ultimately when you're talking about the chain of audio. The most important things in your audio chain are the way in and the way out. All the stuff in the middle, there's levels of quality, of course, to the interface and things like that, but they don't really make as much of an impact on the sound. I can have a $2,000 audio interface and plug a $50 mic into it, and it sounds. I have a really accurately recorded $50 mic. Right? But I can take a vintage $2,000 Neumann and plug it into a $20 interface, and it still sounds pretty darn good. So it's all about the source, and in addition to getting a nice microphone on the front end, you got to put it in the right spot because it's physics and acoustics. If you put a microphone in a bad spot, there's no magic button I can do on the other end. As a recording engineer, there's nothing I can do on the other end. Wow. Because it's so easy to buy software and do all this stuff at home, I think there's a misconception that, just send me that and I'll put 20 plugins on it and make it sound better. Yeah. If I go into the studio and I record a band correctly, I recorded a band recently and we spent a lot of time setting up microphones. And I'm trying to remember how many channels it was. I think it was somewhere between 16 and 20.
Wow.
I think when I did the mix, I think there were 3 plugins total.
Oh, wow.
Because I got the mics right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? If you take the time to get the source right, the placement is absolutely crucial. Now, unfortunately, there's no general rule I can give you for anything.
I see.
It really depends on what your sound. There are. Let me take a step back. There are a lot of individual rules. There's no general rule.
Okay.
If you want to talk about violin, I can give you a couple tips on that. I can give you a couple tips on saxophone. I can do that kind of thing. I actually have made a PDF book about mic placement.
Cool.
And
can you send us a link to that?
Yeah, that'll be a great resource, I think.
Oh my goodness.
I do not have it in a link yet.
Okay. It's okay.
I'm actually working on a website and it is not up right now.
Okay. We can
about
put it
2
in the
days
chat
ago,
next week.
Oh crap, this is not up. But let me grab something I can show you real quick. I can send it to you, and if you want to share it. Well, actually, there's another element to this while I'm looking this up.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm going a little bit on a tangent here.
No worries. It's good information for us.
But let's see, preview.
Yeah, if you want to send it to us later, we can send the link to our chat our next episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do have. So what I'm working on right now is I'm working on a website called audiobeginners.com.
Audiobeginners.com. Okay.
Because I get a lot of things like this. I get a lot of people that are talking classical musicians that want to know more. I work with a lot of churches with volunteers and things like that. And these questions come up again and again. So I wanted to make a reference that people could look at for that.
Great.
And
Yeah, that would be very
without getting
helpful.
into all the deep part of it here, actually, I'm gonna switch over to my screen here. Let me just do this because it's easier.
Sure. Actually, we have a couple questions.
Oh, sure.
I can't really. Oh, awesome. Oh, yeah. Let's see this. Great. Awesome.
I talk about if you're gonna buy microphones, I make a suggestion of like the order. But yeah, so if you're a vocalist,
Oh, cool.
and if you start, yeah, there you go. I've got upright bass, I've got violin, brass, woodwinds,
Oh
saxophone.
my goodness! Wow.
All those kind of things.
Piano.
Tomomi's a pianist.
This came up because I was working with a theater production, and a student had mic'd all the instruments in the orchestra pit, and it was rough. So we took a step back and said, here's where you need to try these things, and then you'll get a better source. Again, it's all about the source.
So we'll be able to find that PDF on that website, audiobeginners.com, eventually, right?
Yes, I'm going to have that linked on that website ASAP.
Awesome.
If anybody listening is interested in being part of that, right now there is a Facebook group that is audiobeginners.com. If you go on that and you like it, obviously I'll make an announcement when that actually happens.
Awesome.
When the website goes live.
Awesome. Great.
And
Cool.
I will have it up there, and it'll be available.
Amazing. So we have a couple questions in the chat. I know what an interface is, but people are asking what an interface. I can't really describe it. I just know it connects my mic into my computer. But people are asking what is an interface, and if you could briefly just like kind of a simple description of that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So to make a recording into the computer, obviously we have to go from the acoustic world to the digital world.
Mm-hmm.
So the first step of that is that the sound goes into the microphone, and that turns it into an electrical signal. Well, that electrical signal is not digital. It's still analog. So an interface is a simple box that basically, most interfaces have three parts to them. Sorry, that's three, not two. Most interfaces have three parts to them. There's the microphone preamplifier, which is where you plug in the microphone so you can boost the level. There is what's referred to as the analog to digital converter, which is just what it says it does. It takes the signal from that electrical signal from your microphone and turns it into ones and zeros. And then there's the interface part of it, which is where the USB connection sticks in your computer. So an interface basically is your bridge to get in and out of your computer. Technically, the speakers and the microphone on your laptop would be an interface.
Makes
technically,
sense.
if you want to think about it, you're just getting something external, and the big piece you're missing on a standard laptop or computer would be the microphone preamplifier. That's the part you're missing.
Ari Evans just asked, do you recommend a specific interface? And I guess maybe I'll rephrase this question because I kind of know what he was asking about before. Maybe like a entry level interface, the ones you were talking about for under $100, or maybe a little bit more if you can. Something around that range that's like usable.
Yeah. Hold on a second. I was just looking. So if you're doing an iPad or an iPhone, there's actually quite a number of them out there. They're a little bit more expensive than their USB
counterparts. Yeah.
Counterparts. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. Focusrite makes one. Presonus makes a good one. There are a number of companies out there that make some pretty good interfaces.
Awesome.
In general, the thing, if you're looking at a budget, I would always, so if you have X number of dollars, I would probably say that I would definitely spend more than 50% of my budget on the microphone. And I would probably even push it closer to 70% if my budget allowed.
Interesting.
Because again, the difference between that $100 interface and $1,000 interface is not as dramatic as the difference between a $50 mic and a $500 mic.
I see.
Right.
It's all about the source.
That makes
There's
sense.
not a ton. I mean, there is a somewhat noticeable difference, but switching microphones, having a better microphone is going to be a much bigger, a lot more bang for your buck. Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Ken, I know that you obviously you do a lot of stuff on Instagram and YouTube, and on social media. There's a lot of. Do you run into a lot of compression stuff problems ever with audio, or is that?
I mean, from my experience, just to upload into Instagram or any other platform, I guess there is compression of sorts, and maybe Eric, you can kind of address that maybe a little bit in a sense where is there maybe an ideal maybe exporting options for the audio or like the video so it translates the best when you upload it to other platforms such as Instagram?
There is a this is a very complex topic, and I'm working on a video to explain it. Let me see if I can boil it down. So when we measure sound, we tended to remember the VU meters, the needles that would go back and forth, and then we have the digital meters that peak this way. Long story short, those show you two different things, and when it comes to being online, neither of them are really the thing you need to see.
Oh.
There's a new standard called LUFS. And basically what it is it's a way to measure sound with more weight given to the vocal range, to the speaking vocal range. Now, again, this is an insanely deep topic, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that this LUFS is what streaming platforms are using to decide what they do with your audio on the other end. So if your audio is too loud, then they will squash it. The flip side is if it's too quiet, they will usually turn it up for you. The danger there, though, is if you recorded it too quiet, then you have some hiss and things coming back in, but it's better than them totally squashing it. It also varies depending on the streaming platform. If I recall correctly, I'm going to say it wrong. So certain streaming platforms, if you get too loud, actually squash your audio. Other streaming platforms look at it and go, "Oh, I'm just going to turn you down." But I can't remember which platform's which off the top of my head. Yeah. So
I think Spotify might be like -14.
Yes, Spotify is -14. YouTube's I think -18.
Wow,
something like that. I think,
if I recall correctly.
Interesting.
Apple Music I think is -18 right now. But anyway, again, that's a very nerdy thing that I am working on a way to boil it down.
Okay. Because
it's a complex thing, but it's unfortunately something that you can't ignore.
Right.
If you find a way to measure it, you want to be about, let's just say 20 dB below where your interface goes red, right? A lot of people think, I just want to push this as loud as I can. No. You don't want to do that. That's not the logic that people follow anymore.
Interesting.
And I also kind of want to backtrack slightly, with this kind of microphone thing. I was kind of remembering the time when I was initially getting into microphones and just learning about this in general. I think a lot of people probably will also deal with this, but just like the difference between what a dynamic and a condenser microphone is, because that's probably one of the first things that they'll notice, that there are these two types of microphones. And also within, there's, as you were mentioning earlier, there's a large diaphragm microphone and there's a small condenser microphone, and maybe what those differences are and what the applications are for people who are just kind of getting in, so they know a little bit more about maybe how to select it, what the differences are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So assuming that most of your audience is on the classical realm, I would argue that dynamic mics are really not the fit for what you need. Yeah. Condenser microphones, because if you're recording classical music, you want the detail, you want the nuance, you want you want the tone, right? Dynamic microphones are great for, let's say, for lack of a better term, popular instruments, guitar, rock and roll drums, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
When I do live sound, which unfortunately isn't probably going to happen this summer, when I do a lot of these outdoor concerts with orchestras, we'll put probably 30 odd microphones on the orchestra, and every last one of them is a condenser, because that's what we're trying to get across. We're trying to get the details. So in a nutshell, a dynamic microphone is a little less sensitive, which makes it a little bit happier when you put it in front of that Marshall guitar stack that's playing at 140 dB, right? It can handle that. And you get that drummer that's totally bashing because he just bought the new Metallica record and that kind of thing. Dynamic mics are great for that. They're great for that loud rock and roll singer that's just screaming into it. But that's not what we're doing here. This goes back to the first thing I mentioned about dealing with my clients. I own different microphones for classical music. And even if you have an engineer that kind of knows what they're doing, if all of their microphones were bought for their rock band, they don't have the right tool. Again, if the source isn't right, it's only going to be so good. My collection of microphones, most of them were purchased because I know I'm going to use them for an orchestra, or I'm going to use them for a string quartet, or I'm going to use them for a soloist or whatever. So it makes a difference. While we're on the topic, you also see the term, you'll see some discussion about ribbon microphones. In general, I wouldn't go down that path for anybody. They, again, can be great in the right situation. But a lot of the models that are out there are fragile. If you have a really nice ribbon microphone and you blow into it too hard, you can ruin the microphone.
Wow.
Wow. And they sound amazing on the right thing. They're wonderful for brass, but they tend to be expensive and fragile.
Wow.
So go to the studio, ask to try one there, but I usually don't recommend that the general populace.
So condenser mics basically in general.
If you're talking about classical music, I can't think of too many exceptions. And there are a few exceptions, but I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of giving you the obscure,
of course,
exceptions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
and then I guess, within that, the large and the small diaphragms too. What those differences are, perhaps.
Large and small diaphragms will sound different. One of the key reasons that I mentioned that if you're just doing yourself to just get a single large diaphragm is that a large diaphragm microphone actually has a lower self noise. So when you put headphones on and you hear that hiss because you've turned something up too loud, it's quieter in a large diaphragm. So if I'm a flute player or a violinist, and I'm going to go into a giant concert hall and put this microphone in front of me, and I go to listen to that recording, and I'm going to play something, very quiet and nuanced, I want the least amount of to accompany me, right?
Of course, yeah.
So that's where that thought comes from. Not that a small diaphragm condenser wouldn't work, but if you're only going to buy one mic, I would kind of suggest the large diaphragm. The other thing is that a large diaphragm tends to be more applicable for voice. So if you're going to have any narration or you're going to be on a podcast, then you've got a microphone that serves double duty for that too.
Yeah.
Right.
Small diaphragm microphones are great if you get a pair of them and you're going to record in stereo. That's... If you want to go that route, it's a great thing to do. If you're a piano player, then you probably want to buy a pair of small diaphragms and mic your piano in stereo. But
interesting.
There's no stereo to be had on a saxophone.
And exactly. And are they about the same? Like large diaphragm and small diaphragm, like price wise, are they about the same or? It's really tough. It's apples and oranges, so it's tough to make a comparison. But I think that, in the price range we're talking about, I think that in general, I just thought of exceptions to that. I don't know that I can make a general statement for that.
but there are a couple mics. I sent you guys a list for.
Oh yes.
There's a company called SE Electronics that makes the E7.
Okay.
A friend of mine brought those once, and I tried them, and I was blown away. There's $200 for a pair. That's the
$200.
lowest priced mic that I've been impressed with in a long time.
Wow.
Honestly. Oh, and whatever you do, so there's a caveat to this.
Yes.
That you have to learn how to set them up. You can't just throw them up and go. But you can buy something called, you want to buy a stereo mic bar that allows you to put two microphones on one mic stand.
Okay.
And there's a company called AEA, just the letters AEA.
AEA, okay.
And they make what's called the stereo protractor. And it's a mic bar, but laser etched on the mic bar is a protractor. So if you want to know what 90 degrees is, it shows you. If you want to know what 110 degrees is, it shows you.
Interesting.
And that way, when you're setting it up, you're right there, you can see whether or not you've got the angles right.
Yeah.
Now, again, this can be a little deep, but this is the one thing that I would suggest. This is worth if you want to record in stereo, it's worth the research on this, because recording in stereo opens up a lot of possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is a company called DPA. It's DPA microphones.
Yeah.
It's just DPA microphones. Honestly, their microphones are very expensive. They're incredible, but they're very expensive.
Actually, we do have a question about that in the chat after you talk about this. Yeah. About
I
DPAs.
was just gonna. I love their stuff, but even if you don't buy any of their microphones, if you go on their website, on the front of their website is the menu across the top. The second option is application. And if you go to application and click on live, and you scroll down through there, they give you instructions about where is it? Here's how to mic a drum set. That's not what we're talking about, but let's see here. How to mic an acoustic guitar, how to mic a cello, how to mic a double bass, how to mic a saxophone. They give you suggestions about where to place the microphones.
Wow, that's an incredible resource. Wow.
It's a great resource. The only thing is that, of course, they're going to mention their own models.
Yes. Yes.
So the one thing you would have to do is extrapolate that and go, oh, they said the 4066. Oh, that is a small diaphragm condenser.
Yeah. Wow.
The same rule still applies. There's nothing special about their microphone that means that what they tell you only works for their mic. It's great general information. You just have to translate what kind of microphone they're using to make this suggestion.
Amazing. Hey, one of our Velotro, can you find that in the website, the DPA website? Well, actually, let me just ask that question from the chat then. Sami Violin had asked before. I mean, I guess you kind of answered it indirectly, but he was asking about what do you think about a DPA and interface setup, which is, I guess, probably good, right? If it's like
DPA stuff is amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, I've used enough. We did. I cannot remember the piece, but we put a DPA on a violin soloist at a symphony concert recently, and in that hall, now granted, is a really nice PA system too, but in that hall, we got it to the point where if it wasn't obvious that the violin was obviously louder than the rest of the orchestra, you almost wouldn't know.
Wow.
It sounded phenomenal.
Wow.
And there's a number of other things to that, but again, the source matters.
Yeah.
So yeah, DPA would never be a bad thing. I just put that in a piano for a church, and it sounds phenomenal in their sanctuary.
Wow.
Everybody in the church loved it as soon as I dropped those in the piano.
Well, he's asking, actually, Sami Violin, who asked about the DPA originally, is asking, do you place it over the F hole for a DPA?
You can. I tend to like aiming at the bridge and getting a little bit back.
Okay.
But you can aim at the F hole too. The problem with the F holes are like the hole of an acoustic guitar. You get a little bit of a woof kind of thing. So in an acoustic guitar, it ends up being kind of woofy and it ends up not being useful. Even on nylon string classical, it ends up not being useful. On a violin, the F hole's a lot smaller. So the extra, for lack of a better term, in my experience, the woof can kind of help on a violin. Ultimately, that just comes down. It's a preference thing. I've done it both ways, honestly.
I see. Interesting. And why are these mics so expensive? Is it because they're small or?
It's not necessarily the size. It's the quality.
Quality. Okay.
So to make a microphone that accurately reproduces every frequency evenly is incredibly difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that I don't really have much of a suggestion for microphones in the $100, $200 range for the most part is because they can only do so much. Every one of those microphones is going to take a frequency somewhere in the spectrum and make it peaky.
I see.
All of them. It's just going to be in a different spot on each mic. So the problem is if you can find a mic you like and you like the thing it does, more power to you. But DPA and the other company I really like is Earthworks. They make incredibly neutral sounding microphones, and I can get one of those small DPA microphones and put it on any instrument.
Wow.
And know that it's going to accurately get it. Wow. Whereas if I buy a cheap mic, it's like, okay, I know this will be decent on the bassoon, but it's going to be horrible on the violin. I know it's going to be decent on this, and it's going to be horrible on this. Wow. So that's part of it.
Wow.
That's part of it. And the other thing is quality control.
Yeah.
If I buy $200 microphones, they might not sound the same.
Mm-hmm.
If I buy $2,000 microphones, they're probably going to sound the same.
Wow, that's interesting. So, Eric, thank you so much. This has been great. I guess just one final question. I think it's kind of a general question. Again, I totally agree, and I think we all agree that usually we would, if we needed something to be recorded, we go to an audio engineer. It's not what our forte is, what our specialty is. But because we are all kind of self-isolated these days, are there any actual just general non-classical editing skills you see that classical musicians could the learning curve is not too much that we could just learn maybe that to help our projects right now, just in terms of the actual editing part?
So are you referring to so basically post-production in general?
Post-production, yeah.
The thing that I find for classical music is it's all about less is more.
Okay.
So that's really, again, it starts to go right back to the microphone thing. If you get the right microphone in the right place, then you shouldn't really have to do anything in the computer.
I see.
That's really the trick. And that, again, it just keeps going back to the microphone. If you've purchased a good microphone, then you can put on headphones and move that microphone around and find what you like. And if you take that time to experiment moving it around, then you're going to find something you like. Mm. The other element to this is also not in the computer. It's the acoustics.
Of course.
So you cannot ignore the room. For pop music these days, you can, because it's either synthesized or you put a mic right up against an amplifier. But for classical and acoustic music, the room is half of your sound.
Yeah.
So sit in the corner, sit in the middle of the room, go in a different room. Sometimes people like the reverberance of the bathroom.
Yeah.
Or your kitchen.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's if you put the microphone in the right place, in the right room, then the rest should be fine. When I record symphonies, I hang my mics. I spend the time hanging my mics, putting headphones on, moving, wiggling them a couple inches around in either direction. And then I go home and I put them in Pro Tools and I bring up the faders and great, chop the ends off. There's a little bit more to it than that.
Yeah. I'm sure you're simplifying a lot. I'm sure. But I see. Wow, interesting, cool. So our lives are kind of easier in a way that we just worry about the setup, basically, the setup and the source.
It's less is more. If you're talking about the post production on classical music, less is more. The only thing, if you're going to go down that rabbit hole, is that when it comes to plugins, there are a couple different categories right now. There are the ones that emulate something that exists. Those are meant to impart a new tone. Those are, in my opinion, most of the time useless for classical music.
Yeah.
There's the special effect ones, that, again, kind of the same thing. You want to find one that's very utilitarian. You want to find one. Well, there's two things I would look for: is something that's either very utilitarian, or one that is a Waves has what they call the one knob series, and it's one or two knobs. And what I'm getting at with that is less is more. And if I put somebody in front of a plugin with 40 buttons, they're going to push 30 of them. Right?
Yep.
It's so easy to go down that rabbit hole.
Shiny
And
red
it's
button.
it's easy to let that draw you in.
Yeah.
And start thinking that, I can just do this other thing and make it sound better and better and better. No, it's if the source is right,
Then
you hardly have to do anything. There's a I cannot remember the name. A band called Cowboy Junkies made an album in 1987, I want to say.
Okay.
And they used two microphones, direct to tape. I don't think there was any processing, and that album sounds amazing.
Wow.
It's the Trinity Sessions. I think it's 1987.
Okay.
And it was actually a 360-degree microphone. Very, very expensive microphone, but they set it up in a room and they put the band around it and they recorded it straight to 2-track and then they released it, and it sounds phenomenal. And they hardly did anything to it.
Amazing.
So it can be done. You just have to have the patience to get the front end right.
Yeah.
That's the thing that most people miss. They think the computer's going to solve it, and
it's not. And it shouldn't. At the end of the day, we're listening to recordings not for something that's not realistic. We want to be there as if we're in the concert or
exactly. And especially with classical music, because in rock music you can argue that the studio tone is kind of part of some genres, but classical music, it's just supposed to be pure tone.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Eric. We really appreciate it. I guess we can end with one question from Siwoo Kim Violin. He just asked if there's an Autotune app for iPhone.
Not that I know of,
but
but
it's a joke. But
I have used that on a classical session before.
Oh, really?
Well, the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Autotune did not come out of the gate with the T-Pain.
Yeah. Right. It was before. It was before that.
Yeah, the point of Autotune was you just did an amazing emotional take, but you have two notes that are slightly out of tune. So let's just fix those two, because the rest of the take is an emotional experience. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of records where you would not know that they've been auto-tuned, but they haven't been auto-tuned within an inch of their life. You can set auto-tune to say, you know what, this person is, they're 15 cents off. Just let them be no more than 5 cents off.
I see.
And then you'll never know that I did that. But right, if you're playing a piece and 2.5 minutes in, you're really having an emotional experience, and then you get
just a little bit. Yeah.
No harm, no foul to fix that. Right. I mean,
sure.
The whole point is that we're trying to communicate to the audience.
Yeah.
So there's no harm, no foul in fixing that.
Just small, Wow, interesting. Well, I guess T-Pain is all motion and all errors then.
Well, basically how you do that is you just take all the knobs and turn them all the way up, so that it gives it just instantly picks a note without any nuance. It doesn't let you do vibrato or glissando or anything. It just picks a note and sticks you there. Autotune you can tell it don't even touch the note for 20 milliseconds.
Wow. Which
kind of is, the time it takes for the player to correct themselves. So,
wow, interesting.
It's the tools can be useful, but again, it's all about minimal. Less is more.
Less is more.
Classical.
Well, Eric, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And guys, please check out is it up yet? Audiobeginners.com, or it's going to be up? You said, right?
I'm still working on it. Audio Beginners is up on Facebook.
On Facebook, okay.
And then the audiobeginners.com website, I think, goes to it should be going to a holder page.
It's on a holder. Yeah, it's a holder right now.
A placeholder that's just a green page that says, I'm still working. We're working on this.
Awesome.
Actually, do you do tutorials privately? I think some people might want to book sessions.
Sure. That's actually part of the audio beginners. That's part of what I'm trying to roll out.
Oh, okay. So how can someone reach you? Would email be the best, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Actually, the thing that's probably would probably make the most sense is to use my GrooveU one, which is eric@grooveu.net.
eric@grooveu.net. Okay.
I have a long name, and when I give them my normal email, they misspell it and never get to me.
Oh, I see. Awesome. Yeah, guys. Honestly, hit up Eric if you guys want a private tutorial session, because I feel like a lot of this stuff is gonna help us, especially for the next couple months. The
thing that and this is absolutely, and I'm happy to work with that. I think that the classical industry and the absolute beginners with this stuff are very underserved. When you go online, everybody starts talking about, here's how you mix a rock session with 200 tracks on it. Here's how you mic a full drum set. It's like, no. Let's take a step back and talk about what kind of microphone this is. There's not a lot of that stuff out there. There's a whole lot of high level stuff, but they just expect you to know all the stuff underneath. And that's what the Audio Beginners website is going to cater to.
Awesome.
Everything is researched, because I see YouTube is horrible. There's so much misinformation on YouTube about this stuff. We could be here all night, me telling you some of the things I've seen on YouTube. They're just so wrong.
That's scary to know that. Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, Eric, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much. And we really appreciate all the advice. Really.
Oh, no problem. Anytime.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much. Stay healthy.
No problem.
Bye bye.
You too.